Psych of Human Relations, Chapter 13, Resolving Conflict and Dealing with Difficult People. So by the end of the chapter, what you should be able to do is describe some of the major causes of conflict in the workplace, figure out how you can use assertiveness skills in conflict situations, when and how to implement different effective negotiating skills, the key elements of conflict resolution process, and then what are the role of labor unions in conflict resolution. So for a long time, conflict had a very negative connotation. People kind of thought that if you have conflict, it's not a good thing. In reality, though, what we know is that conflict can help cause growth, can help us change our point of views. And so you need to have some of that conflict. And so it's not all bad. Some of it is, but not all of it is. And so the big thing is to take whatever conflict exists and make it meaningful. Because if you have too much agreement, if you don't have people standing up and saying things, that's when bad things can happen to a company culture. And it doesn't maintain the health of the culture. So in this particular TED Talks, what she essentially talks about is how sometimes the best companies and the best partnerships evolve from people who are willing to have conflict with each other to help them better understand different points of view and to grow and develop as a person. So it's not all bad. The thing to keep in mind with conflict is you have this iceberg that exists. You have the issues at the surface, but really what you have to be kind of aware of is some of those things that are hidden beneath the surface that can get in the way of any kind of conflict. So for example, if there's unresolved issues from the past, those things can be boiling up. And then when you go to address this new issue, those old issues all of a sudden blow up and you're dealing with a problem you didn't even realize that you kind of had. So that's what this is really kind of talking about. We'll look at a number of different conflict triggers here that are going to increase the chances that you're going to have some kind of either intergroup or interpersonal conflict. So some of those are organizational change. As people, we don't really like change. We like things to be predictable. We like things to be orderly. And there's always this tension that exists between trying to keep things the same, yet move in a new direction, that continuing to grow. And really there's danger when you have either too much stability or too much change. And that causes people to get anxious, and so that can cause some conflict. Ineffective or lack of communication, when people aren't expressing or communicating, and sometimes when we don't have effective communication, we don't really know if we do have a conflict or a disagreement because people aren't expressing themselves and aren't talking and aren't letting people know what's going on. Again, when we have a diverse workforce, there's going to be many different cultures and many different values, and at times those are going to clash. They're not going to line up with each other, and you're going to have this conflict that revolves or evolves from that. Workplace policies and practices, when things are thrown at you and they seem unreasonable, or they're not communicated as to why they're being changed, you find that people kind of resist those. And when you have that kind of resistance, you're going to have conflict that goes with it. Adversarial management, when you have those overseers or those bosses who view employees as maybe the enemy or less than, then you're going to have these potential conflicts that evolve from that. The other thing that you see is with the economy kind of ever changing, companies need to find ways to stay competitive. And so that competition sometimes causes companies to have layoffs or downsizing or cost cutting, and that's going to result in conflicts. And then you always have different people. I mean, companies are made up of individuals, and we're all different. And because of that, we're going to have people that we just plain maybe don't like or get along with very well, or we have people who don't get along or like us very well, and that's just kind of the way work goes. There are some types of people, And when you look at these and read through these, you're going to be able to think of people that are in your classes or people that you've met outside of maybe school who fit into these types of difficult people to work with. Here are suggestions on how to deal with those individuals. So if you're dealing with the bully, the backstabber, the whiner, the rambler, the know-it-all, the coward, the exploder, how do you flex your style, change your behavior to be able to deal with those kinds of people? So those are always good suggestions to look at. And one of the things that you can do is if you can think of someone maybe that you work with or someone that you deal with who is like this, try some of these things out and see how that works. The big thing to keep in mind is there's a difference between being aggressive and being assertive. And so when you look at resolving conflict assertively, aggressive people are, as they put there, bulldozers. They just push their way through and get whatever they want done. You have people who are passive, who are always being walked all over. The real hard ones to deal with are those that are passive aggressive. They pretend to be doormats, but when you're not looking, they're going to bulldoze you over. The person that you want to become is the assertive person, the pillar. So what is it that assertive people do? Assertive people stand up for themselves. They aren't trying to push themselves forward at the expense of others. What they're just trying to do is they're trying to look out for themselves. And so these are the different things that assertive, aggressive, and passive people do. The big thing with being assertive is you want to be honest and direct. You want to have integrity when you're dealing with people. And you want to use I statements because it's about you and what you believe and what you think and that's why it needs to be I. How to become more assertive and how to stand up for your rights and express your thoughts. If you are not an assertive person, small steps, baby steps, and they have some in there. And again, practice using those I messages, because people won't argue when you say, I think that, because that is what you think. It gives you a lot of control over the message, but it also creates a zone of safety because you're not attacking the person. I mean, you got to be careful on how you word it, but ideally the I message doesn't attack the other person. It just expresses what you are feeling, what you are thinking, and that's a good practice. And it takes practice to get good at them. Also, that be soft on people and hard on the problem. Treat people with respect and dignity, but that doesn't mean then that you ignore the problem. And you want to make sure that you are focusing on the problem, not on the individual. So this is going to take some tact. I mean, you have to be careful, you have to be diplomatic, and you kind of got to be patient, especially if you're dealing with someone who's a very difficult person. When you talk about learning to negotiate effectively, the problem, I think, is too many times people think of negotiations as a zero-sum game. What that means is that that there's a finite amount, and the idea in a zero-sum game is that I want to get all of it and the other person loses all of it. And when you really talk about negotiations, you need to not think that way. You want to think win-win, right? So if you're going in and trying to negotiate a pay raise, or if you're trying to negotiate a promotion, you want to approach this from a win-win. How is your employer going to win from paying you more money or by giving you a promotion, right? So they're not losing, they're winning, and at the same time you win. So that's a way of thinking and really changing your mindset. So this Rob Walker gives you ideas on how to negotiate effectively. And again, one of the things that I would suggest is to use this and to practice these things. You can use them with your friends or your family or your parents. So if there's something that you are hoping to negotiate from your parents or to get, I guess I shouldn't say because that's zero sum, but if there's something that you want to try and convince your parents of, here's a good opportunity to do it. You want to stay rational. You don't want to get overly excited and emotional. Exhaustive preparation is going to be a bigger key, because if you keep throwing these rational, logical explanation at your parents, sooner or later they're probably going to get wore down by the fact that they realize that you've really thought this through and you have all kinds of alternatives. It's really difficult when someone keeps bringing very good, strong points at you. At some point, you just have to realize that they are negotiating from a position of power, and you're kind of at a position of weakness. Another good clue down at the very bottom, the last couple two, make sure you spend less time talking and listening and asking good questions, because as you ask those questions, again, they're understanding that you really have a good grasp on what's going on based on how good your questions are. And let the other side make the first move, so that way you can kind of negotiate from there. One of the big things to be aware of is defensive behaviors, because as soon as people become defensive, essentially what they're going to do is they're just going to shut down. And what they begin to think about is survival. How do I defend myself and protect myself? So you have to be kind of in tune. Is this person starting to kind of put up a wall that I can't get through? Because if they start building that wall, you have to take a step back so that they can feel safe and they can let that wall come back down before you kind of continue. So tips for negotiating a new job, salary, pay raise, whatever it might be. Make sure you kind of, again, do all of your research. You want to come in with as much information as possible. You also really want to know what you're worth and be able to clearly explain that and be able to prove it. The other thing with women, if you're going into the workforce, you need to be kind of extra assertive, because that's one of those things that you really have to stand up for yourself and really let people know what your worth is. Mika Brzezinski has written a book, Know Your Worth. It's well worth reading for the girls in the class, so that way you can kind of know how to be able to go in and negotiate and how to clearly explain what you're worth. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is the impact on your long-term earning power. If you get a $50 a month raise, which is $600 a year, you may think, well, okay, $600, $50 a month, it's not that big of a deal. But multiply that over the course of 30 years. That has a big impact on your long-term earning power. So the sooner you can begin to negotiate those pay raises, the longer time you have for that money to accumulate. And that's the way you kind of the way you want to think about things. So styles, or how to vary your negotiating style. They're going to go through a handful of different styles that you can use. So here are the different styles, and they also give you situations when you want to use those particular styles. I'm not going to read through them for you because you can do that for yourself. But again, look at what is the situation, and based on that situation, then you can match your style of negotiating to that particular situation. How to have crucial conversations. This is a pretty important thing for not just being in the workplace, but crucial conversations are important in any kind of relationship, whether it be with your friends, family, significant others. Being able to have these important conversations without things going off the rails are very important. So some of the key concepts here in terms of pool of shared meanings, this is the stuff that we openly share with each other, and that information is what's going to help us eventually reach some kind of solution, hopefully. Where things can go off the rails is when people move towards silence or violence. Once things get out of the safety zone, those are kind of the two ways people are going to react. And what we need to do to be able to move towards a workable solution is we need to keep things in that safety zone. So when you notice that people are starting to get worked up, moving maybe towards violence, or when you start to hear people you stop hearing people talk and you realize that they're avoiding and withholding, that's when we kind of need to take a time out and figure out how to get back into that safety zone. The other thing to keep in mind is these made-up stories, and we do this a lot as people. We take situations and we create our own kind of script as to why we think that happened, and that may not be what's actually happening. And so we have to be aware of not just the stories that we make up ourselves, but realize that when we're having conversations with people, they may have their own made up stories that they're bringing into the situation, and they may be made up, but in their minds they're real. And being able to recognize that can help you kind of move through these crucial conversations. When you walk into a conflict or when you experience conflict, here are the things that need to kind of take place in order to resolve them. One is assertiveness. If you walk into a conflict and you try and bulldoze, or if you become a doormat, you're not going to get anything resolved. If you are dealing with those difficult people that we kind of talked about earlier, use those strategies to be able to deal with the bully or the know-it-all. Always kind of approach things from a win-win standpoint, because if you can create a win-win, then both people are going to walk out feeling much better. Learning how to negotiate, when to use the different kind of negotiating styles is going to really help. So 5-step conflict resolution process. The first thing is this a misunderstanding, or is this a true disagreement, true conflict? Once you decide that it is a conflict, what is the problem? Get as much information as possible. Clarify the different perceptions and the different perspectives of the people involved. Figure out, again, how you can generate options that are going to get you to win-win. And then once you come up with that and you decide on a solution, you need to implement it with integrity. In other words, you can't in the back of your head think, I'm not going to do this. This isn't how I think it should be, so I'm just going to kind of fake it. That isn't going to work. You have to truly implement the option and do the best you can. And then if it doesn't work, once all parties have truly tried, then you go back to the drawing board and you come up with something else. Another situation you may encounter in the workplace is when you belong to a labor union or work in a company that has labor unions. What can happen is when employment contracts expire, so for example with teachers, we now have 2-year contracts. So at the end of 2 years, those contracts need to be renegotiated. And with the teachers union, they sit down with the administration and the school board, and they have a process called collective bargaining where they negotiate pay raises, benefits, those types of things. If they can't come to any kind of agreement, then their disputes go one of 2 different directions. So one is mediation, where they agree to have a third party come in and help the 2 sides come to some sort of agreement. Another would be voluntary arbitration, where they turn over their disagreements to a neutral third party, and then that third party looks at all the facts and then hands them in a finished agreement. Now, in some cases, so for example, if it's in the interest of the nation, sometimes the government will get involved and be compulsory arbitration. So the government essentially comes in and takes over the negotiation and hands both sides the final settlement. One of the things that's really unique is that our economy is ever changing and growing, and there's a whole new group of workers who are outside of the traditional workforce. So these are people who work for like Uber and those types of things. They're essentially an independent contractor. They are out there working on their own, and what really gets to be a little difficult is that those people don't have some of the traditional things in place to protect them as workers. So there's not a whole lot of legal precedent, and so really this has popped up and grown so quickly that the American legal system hasn't really kept up to all of these changes. And typically what we are seeing is that the employers are the ones who benefit from this system far more so than workers, and workers really don't have any kind of institutional or traditional support system to help protect them if there's disagreements.